Well, hello, a very warm welcome. My name is Adrian Reed. Welcome to this short espresso-sized 30-minute LinkedIn Live conversation. I'm really pleased today to be joined by Carla Janzen and Kevin Haines. We're going to be talking about two topics that are probably at the front of many of our minds. We're going to be talking about product discovery and indeed estimation. And this is really a bit of a preview to Carla and Kevin's session at the Building Business Capability, the BBC conference, which is happening a little bit later in the year in Phoenix, Arizona. We'll come on to talk about that a little bit later. But before we get started, a few things to mention. One is if you are watching this live and you've got a question or a comment, put it in the comment section. And fingers crossed, assuming the technology works, I should be able to bring those up on screen. I say fingers crossed because in the last live stream, that bit didn't work. So if you are watching live, put something in the comments now. I'd be really grateful because I can see whether I can see them or not. So do put your questions in the comments. If for some reason we can't address them during the session, we'll sort of come to them after. But before we get started, I'll just ask Carla and Kevin to briefly introduce themselves. So Carla, if you could go first.
For sure. Thank you, Adrian, for having us here today. So my name is Carla Janzen. I am the president of the IIBA Winnipeg chapter. I am also a principal consultant and senior business analyst at Online Business Systems. And I also do quite a bit of coaching along business analysis kind of in my spare time with our local university here, University of Manitoba, and at Online as well.
Fantastic. So we have our first comments coming in, which is great. So the comments are working. So if you are watching live, do feel free to ask questions. And Carla, that's fantastic. I always have huge respect for people who volunteer for IIBA, and I know how much is involved with that. So Kevin, if you'd like to introduce yourself next.
Well, thanks so much, Adrian. And Carla and I have had the great opportunity of working together at Online Business Systems. I'm also a board member of our IIBA local chapter. I was president for 6 years before Carla had joined, and I'm going into, I believe, my 12th year on the board. So I've been with the board for a long time, passionate about the IIBA. I believe I joined in 2006, certified BA professional and a few other certifications. I'm an instructor as well. Local colleges I teach, as well as I've been helping to develop some BA programs with other universities. So I love to contribute, and on top of my day job, I'm a very nerdy, passionate BA. I've been thrilled to attend BBC. I believe this will be my 11th year, and fortunate to have met Adrian through the BBC as well. So very, very thankful for this opportunity. Thank you so much, Adrian.
No, you're most welcome, and again, kudos to volunteering for IIBA for so long. So let's get to the topic of discovery, because one thing I find in the organisations I work with, the business analysts I work with, is the word discovery can mean quite different things to different people and in different contexts. So how would you both describe it, and when does it start and when does it end?
You want to take a crack at that, Carla?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, discovery is it's typically your first time that you're working through a problem, and it's typically with the client. So it's typically about understanding the space of the problem, the size of the problem, the scope of the problem before jumping to solutions. In a discovery, they're typically a few weeks long. I'll call it between 4 and 12 weeks. And typically speaking, understanding the problem is about 80% of the discovery. And then you come up with the solution typically right at the end, or at least a solution to propose. And it's really the benefit of discovery is to help bridge that gap between the idea and the execution. So really as a preparation for going into delivery. And it's also about from a personal standpoint, I find that I have to keep asking myself, is this important now or can it be figured out later? So it's really about making sure that you're only focusing on enough to get us to a delivery.
That's really interesting. So almost like a thin slice. It's like just enough, just in time to get us to the next decision point or the next juncture.
Exactly.
Interesting. When I hear that, and going a little bit off piece now, one of the challenges I suspect many people have experienced, and I suspect you've both experienced, is that quite often people have a pretty firm view on what the solution should be long before they've ever considered the problem. Do you find that? And how do you get around that?
I think you're absolutely right. It's so funny over the years, and I've experienced this firsthand, that people come to you with a solution and not with the problem. And as business analysts, we need to put on that hat to get to root cause and try to back things up. And often the solution proposed is not the best solution, not the right solution, not the most cost-effective solution. And so I think that's a very, it's a great point that often, when someone comes with a solution, that's where we have to really take a step back. And I would add that in terms of the discovery methodology that we use, really we start with strategy. We try to understand, what are we trying to achieve? What is the problem? What is what's our North Star in terms of what it is that we're trying to uncover and solve together? And then we have a bit of a methodology to work through things like journey mapping and developing personas and building a backlog, maybe at an epic level, at a higher level of detail that later will bring down to the right level of detail to actually do work. But that's often the discovery, is making sure that we follow that process, make sure we understand, why are we here today at all? What is the problem? Why aren't you, and when we're often brought in as, specialists or someone that can build something for you, like what is it that you're looking for? And then that often is the conversation starter that will help us work through the discovery process.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was visualizing in my head there, like a bit of a dance between the what, why, and how. And it's like, well, people might start with a how, but you ask what they want, what they want that for, and then why do they want it, and then what else they want. So you've got that kind of recursion going on.
Absolutely.
Great. So, thinking about tools and techniques, right? Because people always love to hear about tools and techniques that fit within a context. If you were working on a piece of discovery, what kind of tools, techniques, approaches would you be using?
Kevin and I probably have our different favorites. So I'll talk about mine first, and then Kevin can say his favorites. So from my favorite perspective is really, I like to focus on user journey maps. They're a really great way to, being a business analyst, I work within epics and features and user stories. So the way I'm using user journey maps is really to document out at the persona level what those epics would potentially look like, and start to map out some of those features. And as I'm doing that, it kind of helps set that framework for when we get into delivery. What is the scope of the user stories? Where can we dig in more? Where did we potentially have assumptions that need to be validated? And then the other thing that I really love doing, though I typically work with a designer on, I don't actually do myself, is some wireframes. And this is a really good way to get the client to have, get some hands-on work, get them to actually see a bit of a vision. So we would typically pick wireframes or screens that are very important to the user. So they're maybe high touch or they're high value for the user, really to just get a good understanding of where the direction of the product would go downstream.
Fantastic. You and I have very similar. So it's funny. User journeys or customer journeys and journeys in general. Like I often say that there are different types of as is. There's the as is you think you're giving the customer or user, and there's the journey you're actually giving them, and sometimes there's even a delta between those two. But that's a whole different topic. So, Kevin, what about your favorite techniques?
So we align, and we do have a bit of a methodology, so a lot of similarities. And when we talk about tools, we're doing a lot of work virtually these days. So obviously love to whiteboard and then stickies as much as we can, but with virtual stickies, we're often using tools like Miro, for example, where we can put some things together and kind of on the virtual wall working together. Another thing that I really like in terms of, I'll say techniques is really storytelling. So I think it's really valuable to use storytelling in terms of, imagine that we've developed this thing that you're hoping to develop, but what do things look like? Like, tell me what, give me some of the things that, what it will look like once we're there. And that's actually really useful early on to understand what some of the success criteria might be, or what the deltas might be versus, to your point, the as is versus what the target might look like. That helps us to get there. And often when people are, I'd say storytelling, there may be some unconscious items that they are not aware of that you will hear. There may even be some bias or things that we need to address in terms of how we're looking at things. So I like storytelling on top of sort of the standard journey mapping, personas, and those sorts of things as well. So that's just an extra kind of thing that I think is valuable.
Yeah, interesting. And I mean, it's a way of getting buy-in as well, isn't it? Or a way of making something sound more compelling and less dry in
Right.
a way. Because as humans, we just love stories, don't we? We tell stories, and
Yes.
we watch movies which have a storyline and so on. So. Great. So I was reading the abstract of your session at BBC, and it touches on product discovery and estimation. So why estimation? I mean, clearly they're linked, right? Because often discovery is going to lead to estimation. But what was the thinking behind bundling them together?
So to me, discovery, a lot of people, and this kind of goes back to your original question, but discovery isn't to me about building the backlog. It's about setting the direction and giving us the right scope to estimate. So when I say scope to estimate, I mean in terms of user needs, in terms of technical feasibility, and really it's about making sure that we understand at the output of as a deliverable of the discovery, this is what we discussed, and here's a point in the sand that we believe is an estimate. I mean, otherwise than that, estimate is just a guess, right? So it's easy for anyone to say, ballpark, whatever, $100,000, $1 million, $2 million, but without actually having those sessions with our clients and with our team, we don't necessarily know exactly what the scope of the work is.
I think the other thing that we're finding is, so we generally like to time box the activities that we do. So from a discovery perspective, when we're planning a discovery, we like to have a sequence in terms of the things that we'll do. And we generally will time box things as much as we can, but make sure that we're working towards, and we have a target to make sure that we have enough information that we can actually build or put together an estimate. And so what folks often want, really they would love to do everything for a fixed price. So, having a fixed cost, and without having the right information to build that estimate, or at least to understand the assumptions or the elements that we're considering, we want to have that alignment and buy-in. And so by having a methodology for estimation, that's really helped a lot to make sure that we can agree on what is the scope of work and how are we going to do it, what kind of roles do we think we're going to need, are we on the same page as to we're using agile and we'll have sprints, and our sprints will be 2 weeks, or we're going to have a sprint 0 and this is what we expect to do in that sprint 0. So aligning on all of those things are really what we want to be able to do as one of the outcomes of the discovery, to say that we've we understand what it is that you'd like to do. We have a good understanding at a high level of what is going to be in scope and out of scope. And it's almost like a living business case, right? And going through that process and saying, okay, we understand that there are going to be these benefits, and this is what we expect to have in terms of tangible or intangible benefits. And then here are the costs that we think are going to be related. And we might even be thinking about some architecture. We might be thinking about some tools or platforms. But this is really how, bringing the idea and making it a reality. This is part of the journey on how we can get there to be able at the end of the day to, put a price tag to the idea to make sure that we're aligned.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, as you were both describing that there, I was thinking about, this is weird, but I often find like analogies of building a house or a building useful. And this to me is like, well, let's make sure we know how deep we need to dig the foundations, because we kind of need to know whether we're building 100-story skyscraper or like a 1-story bungalow. And we don't necessarily need to know the colors of the walls in the bungalow yet, but we kind of need to know whether it's a bungalow or a skyscraper.
Right.
So I'll just bring in a couple of comments that people have submitted. So Nuno says that user journey maps after story mapping. User journey maps and after that story mapping. And story mapping can work really, really well, and can be a good way of sort of bringing that down another level. And again, if I mispronounce anyone's name, I apologize. I think that's Faran. Says Kevin, well said. Storytelling is an amazing way to get perspective before even tooling, and that's I think that's another important point, is that often sometimes the focus is on the tooling or whatever, but actually the human elements of, but why are we doing this? What's the story we're going to tell to make this change happen? Is equally or more important. But just sticking with the theme of estimation, I'm sure everyone listening to this who's ever been asked to put any kind of estimate together has had some sort of challenge doing it, right? Either a challenge doing it or a challenge when they've given a number out. What kinds of challenges have you faced, and how do you kind of address them?
Well, Carla, I don't know if you're going to take a pass at it. I'll kick it off. So lots of challenges, of course. And, in terms of being on the side of the fence of building the estimate and providing the estimate, we want to be as I'll say, as cautious and as protected as possible, making sure that we've brought in as many resources as we can and the kinds of roles that we would love to have involved, and making sure that we have things like customer experience and that we have program management, and that one of the things we like to do is to have a work ahead team, so that as we have one team that is, I'll say, on a regular basis building and developing, having a work ahead team that's actually putting work into the funnel to a level of detail that can be pulled on a regular basis, it really means having two teams. And so you have to be able to paint that picture and explain why it's important and valuable, and people making sure that you're able to communicate the value that it's going to deliver in the estimate is one of the more challenging things, where someone says, well, we never do that and we've never had a problem. So now you're trying to share some of the benefits and concerns and make things tangible and explain things in a way that I think people can relate and that will buy into, and that they'll understand that maybe there's extra cost, but there's extra value. So those are some of the challenges. I mean, there are lots. So Carla, I'll let you, maybe any that are top of mind for you.
Yeah, I mean, estimation, it really is what it is. It's really tempting to give ballparks, but that often leads to some issues down the line when it comes to delivery, because you're always going to you always have the inherent idea to come back to that original estimate and say, well, why did we think this? Because you're going to end up over, and sometimes you're going to end up with a little win. You might end up under, but you always typically need to trace back to those original assumptions and those original statements. So a lot of the challenges that I have, especially during discovery on an estimation, is, I'll call it, vague or very broad spread requirements. Conflicting stakeholder priorities are very common as well. When you have a lot of people that want the world in their one app, one requirement might take more precedent over the another, or one requirement might be significantly more expensive, but maybe not necessarily deliver the value. So to Kevin's suggestion, making sure that you understand not just at the estimate level when you're creating the estimate, what the estimate is, but also how that particular feature or how that particular epic is actually delivering value to the client and to the users.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, isn't it? And it's a phrase I've heard throughout this conversation about value, understanding the value that estimation can bring, articulating the value that discovery can bring, and now sort of understanding and articulating the value that a set, an epic or a set of features or whatever can bring, which actually all really pins back to having done that discovery well, doesn't it? Because
Yes.
Without the discovery, it's a bit sort of like, well, whoever shouts the loudest, because we don't know whether we're building a skyscraper or a or a bungalow. So it sort of underpins the importance of that process. So moving on. One of the challenges that I suppose we all have with estimates is they are inherently uncertain. And without being too facetious, estimates are estimates, right? And I remember I heard someone who I have a lot of time for, a huge amount of respect for, once said to me, the thing about estimates is if you estimate, you will be wrong. Like, you're never going to hit that's not the point, isn't to hit the exact number. That it's an estimate is an estimate. But how do you deal with that uncertainty, and or how do you ensure that people don't treat it as like a firm commitment? Because there's that difference between a commitment and an estimate.
I can speak from my perspective, and Carla, I'll let you go next. But one of the things I think is really important is understanding our confidence and being able to understand that the estimate has a certain confidence. There may be times where we're feeling very confident and maybe the range is within 10% or 20%. And there might be others where it might be, plus 100, minus 50%. And as long as I think that we explain what our approach is, methodology is, we'll be transparent in terms of what we've done and how we're doing it. If there's value in pursuing some features or some items that might be lower hanging fruit, we'll build it in. And if there isn't, that we'll have ways, I guess, of adjusting depending on our confidence. So I find that that's really valuable. I think governance and change management is another one as well that we can speak to, that if we find something that adds a lot of value, that we'll use proper governance and change management to build it into the work. And there will be, a clear process for doing that and making sure that we get agreement, approval before we proceed. So those are a couple of things that I like to build in to make sure that we are more comfortable with proceeding, knowing that we have some of those levers in our pocket.
Great, Carla. Anything to add?
Yeah, very much in line with what Kevin said. I would say that it's really important to always state your assumptions. And the assumptions are not just to make sure that it's written in a statement of work. It's more so to make sure that everyone is on the same understanding of what the product is or is not. And they kind of, assumptions always come back and bite you. They're kind of the White Walkers of discovery, but they're very much important and required when you're coming up with an estimate and dealing with uncertainty.
Yeah, you know what? So much of what you've both said has resonated with me. One of the things I was advised very early in my career by someone much more experienced than I was at the time was never ever give an estimate that isn't a range or that doesn't have a tolerance. And that's stuck with me. And it's a transparency thing, isn't it? Because if you're, plus 100, minus 50, you're saying this really is a ballpark. And it gives the decision maker clarity, because they might say, oh, I'm not happy with that risk, in which case you can say, great, well, in which case, if we do this over this number of weeks, we can reduce that, but we need to do some more, we need to get more information to refine the estimate. So I'm just going to bring in some quick fire questions now. So the first one is, do you revisit, so from Lizzle, do you revisit estimates when you get more clarity? So do you go back and update them?
For me, it really depends on how the contract is built out. If it is a project that is time and materials, then it comes down to, of course we do. If it's a fixed price project and there's less of an opportunity, then it really comes down to you're revisiting those estimates and you're revisiting the original plan for the scope. And if there's significant variations, then you may or may not have change control procedures in place to deal with that. Yeah. So yes, but depends on what kind of project is the outcome.
Absolutely. So yes in concept, but it depends on the commercial wrapper around the situation. I'll just add a comment from Kevin that I think is a really interesting one. Kevin says that he likes to look at estimates as an order of magnitude decision on if we should even move forward. So it's like, and that's and by the way, rough order of magnitude, one thing I like to always keep in the back of my head is an order of magnitude is a factor of 10. I did physics at school, and that was the times 10 to the power of, right? So order of magnitude is really that rough and ready. Farron asks, estimation techniques like Delphi, are they still standards valid in today's world, or are there other recommendations? As a slight aside, planning poker is sort of a form of Delphi when you think about it, but that's a whole separate aside. But do you use like formal either 3-point? I know there's like 3-point estimation with best, worst case, mid case. Do you use those types of approaches?
We do. So one of the things I did want to just touch on a little bit is one of the things that, and actually Carla was really instrumental in doing this, is building. We have an estimation tool, which is really just built in Excel, but it does a lot of those sorts of things, right? And so we do often start with the development effort that we expect, and we do a sort of best case, worst case, and expected. So we use that in the tool. We also will have a factor that we like to apply for, if we have a certain amount of development, we expect a certain amount of business analysis, a certain amount of quality assurance. We will also use that to factor in terms of, depending on the size of the team, from a project management perspective, or even a program management perspective, depending on the scope of work. That helps to drive a lot of those things. And again, there is confidence that we apply to it. But we do have sort of a top-down and a bottom-up approach in making sure that we're meeting in the middle. Often team members, we try to understand, well, how many team members do we think we need? And then we build in some of the contingency. So there is some math, I will say, that we use behind the scenes and some science. But it does really need to be validated and approved, and kind of refine that tool as we go.
Yeah. Do you know what, Kevin? As you were talking there, this is triggered. Studying for the CBAP and the different estimation types that are in BABOK and parametric estimation, or I think you were discussing parametric and a bit of analogous estimation there, but that's just the geeky BABOK stuff coming out. So I'm just going to share my screen because, of course, you are both speaking at the Building Business Capability Conference. Your session is called Building Your Product with Confidence. So I'm just going to kind of scroll through the agenda while you answer this next question to let people kind of see what's going on at the conference generally. But without giving too much away, what are people going to get by coming to your session?
So during our session, we're going to go a lot deeper, how to run a great discovery, how to break down features, how to build your estimation case with some confidence. Kevin and I we've been on a number of projects together at this point. So we like to share a lot of examples of real deliverables during our times during discovery and delivery, and how we aligned those discovery outputs to estimation.
Fantastic. I'm just realizing how much there is there. I thought it would take me, like, I'm still scrolling. Like, it just goes on. It's just, it really does.
Yeah, it's a great agenda.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm certain that as well as coming to see you at BBC, people will want to stay in touch with you. They'll want to connect with you. How is the best way if people want to connect with you? Is it sort of LinkedIn or how's the best way to stay in touch?
I use LinkedIn pretty regularly. I'm checking in, I would say probably daily. Given our virtual social media world, I'm accessible, I'd say pretty much 24/7. But yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way to make sure they get a hold of me.
And of course, come and talk to us at BBC when you're there.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely encourage anyone who's watching to take a look at the BBC agenda. If you can get to Phoenix, then it's always a really I always find it's like a dose of inspiration. You get to speak to other like-minded BAs and change professionals, and it really kind of ignites your inspiration. So excellent. Well, Carla, Kevin, thank you so much for taking time out to join us today. I know there are a number of questions we've not been able to get to in the chat, but we're getting some nice comments saying thank you for the insight you've given. I can't put them all up on the screen because we're out of time. But the only thing I'm going to say just before we close is for anyone watching, some of you might not be aware of, hopefully you are aware of, but some of you might not be aware of the free publication BA Digest, which is completely free. It's PDF. You don't even need to register. And all you need to do and the Q2 version has just been released a week or so ago. If you just go to badigest.link, that is badigest.link, you can download the free version of that as well. So well worth doing. But with that, all that's left for me to say is, Carla, Kevin, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to seeing you in person at the conference. So until then, bye for now.
You too. Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you.